guys, I am going to be talking about my birth story from Dexter, who is now 8 months old. And that sound you just heard was my heart breaking and shattering. I cannot believe he's already 8 months old. It was a crazy journey from conception to his delivery, and I will say that there was a huge battle with every single thing. The doctors didn't want to consider me high risk because they didn't want to put that over my head, but I was high risk. So it was really confusing, and it was really hard to kind of understand what each doctor said, because I had my doctor and then I had to go see specialists that did ultrasounds, and I had one specialist who wanted to induce me before the time period when Sophia was born, which was 38 weeks and 3 days. And he said 37 weeks would be a good week because of the fact that placental abruptions double after 37 weeks. And clearly that was our biggest fear, is having another placental abruption that was concealed. And we ran into an issue because another one of the doctors that saw me and did the ultrasounds basically came at me with a bunch of old documentation that states that placental abruptions don't reoccur. And I gave him all the new information and he disregarded it completely, and I told him about all the studies and the evidence, and he didn't care, and he said that I was putting my baby at risk by wanting to induce early. And it was just really rude, and there were some really bad moments that I had because of it. We were essentially trying to figure out when the best time to have the baby would be for my safety and for our baby's safety. The worst part of all of it was that placental abruption wasn't the only risk we were dealing with. We were also worried about IUGR, which is intrauterine growth restriction, due to the placement of the placenta and the cord insertion. So I had a marginal cord insertion, which meant that you have, so we're just going to play a game and say that this is the placenta of the baby. What you want to see happen is you want the cord to insert somewhere in the middle because it's thicker and meatier, and clearly it would get more nutrients that way. But for whatever reason, my cord with Dexter decided to be marginal, which means that it inserted somewhere within 2 millimeters of the edge. So the problem with that is the cord obviously can't get enough nutrition and blood. So we had extra ultrasounds on top of everything for that, and non-stress tests, and it was constant. I really don't know that I breathed at all during that pregnancy. It was so stressful. So we came up to a point where we really needed to figure out what we were going to do, because I was determined not to carry until 38 weeks, because 38 weeks and 1 day is the last time we heard her heartbeat, and 38 weeks and 3 days is when she was born still. So I knew how quickly it happened, and I was so worried it would happen again that I felt like I was just constantly fighting a brick wall. And then we had the issue where the doctor who had originally said we should induce early had retired. So now I was dealing with trying to get him to kind of like come back and say what he said, and he did. But my doctor who was actually going to deliver the baby, had the issue of the other doctors stating what he stated to the board of the hospital. So again, the board of the hospital was somehow controlling my birth. And it was really frustrating. And so what essentially happened is I refused to go back to that doctor. So I saw somebody else in the same practice, and he was actually employed there, not retired. So I talked to him and told him the entire situation, and he talked to my doctor who was going to deliver me, and essentially agreed with the very first doctor who said I should be induced early. However, he had some conditions that the hospital wasn't going to sway on, and the conditions were that I would have to undergo a amnio. So essentially they wanted to put a needle in my stomach through the uterus And at this point, we already knew that my placenta was attached to the front. So there was a higher risk of it going through the placenta, which could lead to abruptions. So of course they would do it by ultrasound, and they would check the amnio and make sure lungs were developed, and if lungs were developed at 37 weeks, they would induce me. If they were not, then they would put me in the hospital for that week and monitor me 24/7 until that baby was born. At 38 weeks is when they would for sure induce me. But I had a huge issue with that. So we essentially came to an agreement, and that worked out. I essentially came to the hospital, and they checked me and decided that they were going to induce me for fear that I would have a placental abruption. So there's more to that story, but I don't feel like discussing it. It essentially was a benefit to me. And we went in, and to all of our surprise, I was actually already in labor. I was already contracting, and I had already dilated, I think, 2 more centimeters from where I was previously, so I was a 4.5, which meant that they weren't going to send me home, that I was done, I was admitted, and the baby was going to be born. So they started me on a Pitocin drip, and my doula came, but she was already there because she had another client in the hospital. So we essentially just kind of waited. And once things started to pick up, I asked for the nitrous oxide gas, and that was all I used, was the nitrous oxide gas, and my doula telling me I could do it because I didn't think I could. And there were a lot of points where I didn't think I could. I slept through the night twice. I fell asleep with the nitrous oxide gas on. It was fantastic. If you're going to use nitrous oxide gas, I'm going to do another video about specifically the nitrous oxide gas. And okay, so we essentially went through the night, and my doula went back and forth between rooms, and then there was kind of like this churn of events where I got on a bouncy ball at my doula's request, and suddenly the contractions just got worse, which obviously I knew they would. I was worried about getting up because we had done a, man, I can't remember the name of it. It's a monitor that you can walk around with, but they use sandpaper on your stomach first and then stick the sensors on, and it was awful, and it didn't work, and the gel that they used after they did the scrubby thing made me break out in a huge rash on my stomach, and it wasn't picking up the baby's heartbeat, so then I had to go back to the regular monitors. And because of what happened with Sophia, I didn't want to be off the monitors. I wanted to be able to hear his heartbeat the entire time. So, the ball was kind of scary for me because there were times when I couldn't hear him, but my doula kept reassuring me that she could hear him and that he was doing everything he needed to do. And then things got very, very difficult, and the transition process was very odd. I couldn't find a comfortable position to stay in, so I was on the ball, and then I was on the bed, and I was on my knees, and then I was sitting up, and it was like a constant moving between contractions and using the gas during contractions, and then moving again, and then I had this nurse who was horrible. I will literally cry if she's my nurse at all, ever again. She checked me at one point, and I was a 6. So I had made progress, but not a lot of progress. And she came back and checked me a couple hours later, and I was a 7. And the defeat I felt, I can never tell you. So after she told me I was a 7, I had 2 contractions that were crazy hard, and I freaked out because they were the same types of contractions I had with Sophia. Very hard contractions where I could not push. And she, of course, the nurse, told me, don't push, you're not ready yet, you're 7 centimeters. And with Sophia, I went from a 5.5 to a 10 in, I think it was 15 minutes-ish, maybe a little less. So I knew it was completely possible that I had just dilated through these 2 contractions. So I asked her to check me again, and she refused, saying that there was an increased risk of infection, but at that point, there's really not. The baby's going to be born pretty much now. So she did check me, and I was complete, and the baby's head was coming out. And she ran into the hallway. Like, she completely left us by ourselves, which nurses should not do. So if you're a nurse, please don't leave your clients or your patients while they are laboring. It's not comforting. All I could feel is that something was wrong, because this is how Sophia's happened. It went from 0 to 100 and nothing. So of course I started to freak out, and then nurses and doctors, I don't even know who was who, came into the room, and he came out. And I remember not being able to look down, not being able to touch him, and I was in complete shock, I think is really what happened, and I think I had a little bit of PTSD. All I could think is that he was gone too, and I didn't want to see. And it took, I think she was a midwife, possibly a doctor, I don't know who was who. It took whoever had grabbed my son after he was born and her to shove him on my chest, because I refused to grab him, for me to kind of wrap my arms around him and just start to cry. It was a crazy moment, very crazy. I don't really know how to express the feelings that I felt in that moment, but it was like overwhelming joy, peace, irony, upset. I was angry at myself. It was just a whole bunch of everything. And then of course the nurse was trying to be like in her face and apologize, and it was really just unnecessary. And then on top of that, she got stuff stuck in a filing cabinet, so for like 20 to 30 minutes she was rumbling with this filing cabinet trying to get it to open so that she could fix the problem she created, all while we have our brand new baby in the room and we're trying to relax. It was just horrible, but he was born, he was fine. He had jaundice, and so we had to have the Billy light. He was born on the 23rd of October, and Sophia was born on the 26th. So we left the hospital the night of the 25th, and they actually didn't think we were going to go home until the 26th. And I had a little bit of a breakdown at the hospital because of it. But we did get to go home, and it was good. And we celebrated our first day together at the house on Sophia's second birthday. So that kind of made everything worth it. But her story is just crazy. So I think that my absence from doing videos has been essentially just because I've been so overwhelmed with how I really have felt about Sophia, about trying to conceive, about the loss we had after Sophia, and then about having a new boy, when we had hoped for a new girl, and dealing with those emotions during the pregnancy. And we are so thrilled with him, we love him to death. That's not even a thought we think of anymore, but I know for a fact that during the pregnancy, once we found out that he was a boy, I kind of shut myself down emotionally, because I didn't know how I wanted to feel. And I think that's the best way I can put it. But we are 9 weeks pregnant with a new baby, and we are excited and thrilled, and our life is kind of changing again into a more structured lifestyle and not something that's up in the air. So now I have my own space. This is our guest room. This is actually a pull-out couch that our guests sleep on, and it's also my music room and my doula workshop and like my study room. This is kind of my space. So I will be able to vlog a lot more often, thankfully, and that is kind of the gist of how Dexter's birth happened and why my vlog absence has been so long. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to do weekly vlog updates on this camera from now on because my husband's web camera is horrible. If I can find my lapel mic, I know this will be a lot better. And hopefully this congestion is not allergies, because again, I refuse to have allergies. They are horrible. So yeah, that's it. And I guess I will talk to you guys later. If you have any questions about his birth, if I didn't cover something, if you want to know more about the nitrous oxide gas, feel free to leave stuff below, and when I put up my new nitrous oxide gas video, I'll link it on this one too, so you guys can kind of see how the nitrous oxide works. It's really great. I loved it, but there is an actual systematic thing you have to do, or it will make you completely nauseous and sick. So I will definitely try to record that next week. I will see you guys later. Have an awesome week. Bye.